Okay. Well, good afternoon for everybody that made it on this beautiful Friday afternoon. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ben Nichols, the new Executive Director for Fire Safe Sonoma. This month's speaker series is our partner presenting this afternoon is Ivan O'Neill. We're looking forward to a great presentation from him. A little bit about Ivan is that he is the CEO of Madronus, an NFPA certified wildfire mitigation specialist, and he will share with us how homeowners can start protecting their homes for free and verify the work that they've done to get premium discounts. As a born and raised West Coaster, his goal is to make it simple for communities to mitigate wildfire risk and to preserve access to good insurance coverage options. With that, take it away, Ivan.
Thank you, Ben. And thanks everyone for joining and for the opportunity to be together here today. I know it's a Friday afternoon and a little off the normal schedule, but that's because a lot of the Fire Safe Sonoma staff and I were at a conference this week for the wildland urban interface and learning about how we can take the strategies that have been tried elsewhere and bring them to our community here. So thank you for that warm intro. And yes, I live here in Santa Rosa. Try to do as many prescribed burns as I can, never as many as I'd like to. And I also serve on the board of Safer West County, helping prepare communities in the western part of our communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about, how wildfires are threatening homes. I'll promise to keep that brief. I know many of us are very familiar with that. And then talk about what we can do to prevent that and also what's starting to happen in the insurance market and how folks can get better coverage options and more affordable coverage options. And I should say, I'll be showing some images and videos that may be triggering for some. I know many here have been directly affected by wildfires in our area over the past decade. So we'll please be aware of that. But it's this image here from Coffee Park that is the reason that I got into this space. And I think, it really shows what the cost of not protecting our communities and not being able to change the outcomes going forward. And sadly, in the decades since, more and more homes have been lost and wildfires continue to devastate communities across this country, as we saw recently. And the modelers are suggesting that as many as one in five U.S. homes is at risk of being in a wildfire over the next 20 to 30 years. So, collectively, we need to address this. Unfortunately, climate change means that we're going to see more extreme fire weather. And this is a plot of what's called vapor pressure deficit, which is a scientific way of saying how thirsty the atmosphere is for moisture. As we start to put more carbon dioxide in particular into the atmosphere, but also methane and other gases, traps the heat, and that heat is a measure of energy. And as the temperature warms, the atmosphere can hold more moisture, and it's drawing that out of the ocean and the land and also the vegetation. And you can start to see where we've been and where we're going into the future. And this is the current projection. So we're going to see more extreme weather, more dangerous fire weather, where as moisture is drawn out, that creates movement of air. And that's what's increasing global average wind speeds and also leading to more severe wind events. And the other thing is climate change changes what can be insured. If any of us have purchased insurance for an automobile, you know that once you're about 10 years, the depreciation on your car is such that you're not going to pay for comprehensive collision. When the premium exceeds 1% of the replacement cost for the asset, it doesn't really make sense to pay for that to be insured. And in climate, with the new climate, situation, the new climate era, I call it, there was this great paper written by the folks there at the bottom where they illustrated this concept. And this is describing rainfall, but you could take this similar chart and apply it to wildfire, hurricanes, wind and hail, and it's really the same thing. But to illustrate, in the past, we had a purple curve that was our previous climate, and we could insure everything from line A to line B. And you see the area under this is fairly small and reasonable, and we had really good and a really good insurance market. With climate change, we now have a different curve of risk. And we now have to the left, excuse me, to the right of C is all of these events that we didn't really even have models for that are starting to occur. And what used to be a 1 in 20-year event is now a 1 in 10-year event. And what that means is it shrinks what can be insured, but because to insure all of it would the premium would be so high, nobody would buy that insurance. And so, what that means as property owners, community members, we now have to invest in strengthening homes and better firefighting resources, like we've done here in California, and in protecting our properties to withstand the more frequent and also the more extreme scenarios. And so, the insurance, which what's left here that's insurable, is going to cost more, but we can also bring that down with mitigation work. The good news, as we all know, the reason we're here is because we can have impact here. We have agency in all of this. And here are some of the more famous examples from Lahaina and from the Pacific Palisades of homes that have withstood and survived. And there are really good reasons for that. We've been able to study them and start to learn what predicts survival. So we're going to talk about all of this. How do wildfires threaten structures? Which wildfires turn into the conflagrations, the really large losses that are driving the insurance availability crisis? And then how we can bend that curve and protect our homes and communities and access insurance for what for many of us is our most valuable asset. So I'll be brief on this, but we all know that we've changed the landscape here in California drastically. And over the years, this series of 3 photos, I think, really illustrates as we stopped allowing wildfires to burn at lower risk, as we removed traditional practices for stewarding the land, we see the density of fuels, the smaller trees grow up, and we now have almost complete continuity vertically and horizontally that leads to more stress on the bigger, older trees and leads to die off, as well as if a wildfire were to begin, then now the smaller fuels ignite and ladder up the fire into the tree canopies. And removing this controlled fire, which was used by indigenous peoples for millennia to steward the landscape here in California, but really throughout the Americas, has led to these more severe fires. When we don't burn when we want to, it ends up burning when nature decides to. And here is a great example, I think, of the difference in outcome when we're able to get the thinning work done, get good fire on the land, versus no treatment or thinning only. This has a real impact on the outcome when the fire does happen. So when it comes to structures, though, we're concerned about 4 things primarily. It's embers getting into the house. It's embers accumulating, on the outside of our homes. There's the radiant heat as well as direct flame contact. And so any time we're thinking about protecting a home, I suggest, or I'd like to talk about, thinking like an ember or looking at a home through these 4 different lenses to understand how that particular feature on a home is going to be vulnerable, and then what do we want to do about it. So embers, of course, responsible for about 90% of the ignitions. This is a long exposure photo, which I really like because you can see where the embers go when they meet a home. And so there's about 20-mile-an-hour wind here from the right side of the image being generated. And we can see what happens. Where do the embers go? So the real bright spot here at the base of the wall, and then they swirl outward about 5 feet. And there's this sort of eddy current that's being created. They also go up into the area right under the roof line, which we call the gable, under the peak of the roof. And then we see some that go up and over, of course, as well. But it's the base of the wall, the 5 feet around it, and then the gable peak that most of these embers go toward. We talk about direct flames. Anything that ignites is going to be three times, the flames will be three times the length of the thing that's ignited. And if there's a little bit of wind, even about 20 miles an hour, that's going to lean over and start to look like a flamethrower. So when we're thinking about the vegetation on our property, the landscaping, we have to think about what would happen, if this tree or shrub were to ignite, what would be exposed from the direction of wind. So these flame lengths can get quite high. Fortunately, most of us don't live next to areas that look like this. And the last one, of course, is radiant heat. So this is the one that's the most difficult to mitigate against. And there's a good video that we'll be able to post in the show notes that if you'd like to look at this was a presentation by Jack Cohen, well-known researcher. And what it shows, though, is that even with this wall of flames, where the person taking this image was really starting to experience burning sensation on their skin and they had to leave, the home built out of complete wood was completely unscathed after the fire passed through here. So even at a distance, the forest cannot really generate that much heat that it would damage a home at about a 30-foot distance. But when we start to be igniting homes, those do generate a lot of heat, and that's the house-to-house spread that we're trying to overcome. So what causes the large losses of structures? We know how an individual home gets going, but what causes these catastrophes that unfortunately we're seeing too many of? They have a common recipe. IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, put this drawing together, and I think it does a good job explaining it. And if you go and they've studied a lot of fires, and these are the recipe for the large losses of structures. One is we have severe wildfire conditions. That is primarily weather, and it being dry and windy. Doesn't have to be dry for very long. It can be a couple day or even a couple week drought, and then some amount of wind, probably above 20 miles an hour. And that also coincides with relative humidity levels dropping pretty low. So we have an ignition under these weather conditions that leads to high intensity, fast growth of the fire, with the plants being very receptive to igniting. That moves across the landscape where it meets a community. And the further away from the community the fire starts, the bigger the spread, so that we have this kind of front of embers meeting the built environment. And then we have multiple structures igniting simultaneously, which overwhelms our firefighting resources. And that leads to protection being unavailable, and a focus of getting people out and focusing on preventing loss of life. And that then turns into this suburban conflagration catastrophe, like we saw in Lahaina, like we saw in the LA fires. And of course, locally, we've had those experiences too. So I'm not going to play this video. Again, we'll share the notes, but there's a few examples where we've had ignitions occur under, somewhat less severe conditions, where we've also had helicopters in the air who could give us a close-up view and inform us in how these four different ways that wildfires threaten homes, it moves and transitions into the community, and then you have the house-to-house spread. And this was an example, a 100-degree day near Dallas, Texas. The owner of the large lot had been cited for not mowing controlling their weeds, abating the weeds. And so they decided to do it on a really windy, dry day, and they struck a rock with the mower, and it just took off. And This was only about 20 miles an hour of wind. They lost 9 homes, had another 16 structures destroyed. And fortunately, they had the resources, they were able to get on it. And there was another good example down in Newport Beach area called the Coastal Fire. And this is one that was really interesting because it started on the canyon below. They had done a large fuel treatment at the top of the ridge right before the homes. There was like a community fire road that it was also a recreation and a walking path. And all of that had been treated out to 100 feet from the homes, and they still lost about 10 homes. And, these are stucco clay tile roofs. They had all the things that we would expect, but it was still a vulnerable situation. So when we talk about these conflagration risks, this is really, the decision tree or where the risk factors lie. And it comes down to radiant heat exposure, which is how close are our homes together, and then also under what conditions does the fire happen. So if we have homes that are spaced farther apart, 30 feet is a rough number. It can really vary quite a bit, but that's, for simplicity, we'll use that. And if the wildfire ignites under any given day conditions, whether we're a dense community or even a more rural setting, we have the best firefighting resources in the world here in California. We can get the helicopters, the planes in the air. We've got teams, firefighters who are able to get there. They know what to do. And we're able to put that out, 99.5% of the time without losing any structures. And it's an okay situation. When it transitions that weather, we get the red flag warnings, we get the fire weather watch. That's when we all collectively need to let our neighbors know. We need to, be sharing it with our communities. Um, the folks who have separation between their neighbors, they control their own risk. If we've done the preparation work to harden our structures, create that defensible space, which we'll talk about in a moment, your chances of surviving are quite high, and you control your own risk. And it's the irony to me is that so many of these members of our communities are finding it hard to get the insurance. Despite the work that they do on their property. And that's really one of the problems that motivates our team here at Madronus, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's the bottom right corner that is really the challenge, that because most of us, do live pretty close to our neighbors. We have 10 feet of separation between our homes. And that's where we really need participation amongst our communities. And it's the work that we collectively do here at Fire Safe Sonoma and all the FireWise leaders that are on the call, as well as our fire agencies that are carrying the word and helping drive action. So what can we do? What does protection look like? How do we bend the curve on the losses? Well, we know it does work at the community scale. This was a community down in Chile that I had the opportunity to go and study, interview the residents. They had done community work to treat the landscape and the area around it. And pretty much all of these homes had stucco walls, good roofs, small vents, and mostly had done vegetation management. And they were threatened on all three sides. This fire was a terrible tragedy, and they emerged without a single home lost in the community of over 90 homes. So this is the work that motivates us. How many of us, I'm sure many of us have heard of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. This is a insurance industry funded research lab out in South Carolina. They study all different kinds of perils, including wind and hail, flood, hurricanes, and wildfires. This is their research facility. You see the roofs in the foreground that are aging out in the elements, and they test those. In that large building, what looks like a speaker cabinet, those are actually fans that collectively can generate 135-mile-an-hour hurricane force winds. And, it's a really cool facility that if you ever had the chance to visit, I would recommend it. But they've done a lot of research on the wildfires problem. And they created this program called Wildfire Prepared that is the only insurer recognized performance-based standard for protecting homes from wildfires. And increasingly, we see that being adopted by insurance companies, as well as they're offering premium discounts. So there's a number of insurers that have publicly signed on, State Farm being the biggest, but also Farmers and Mercury, AAA, CSAA, as well as USAA. And there's another one that's about to be added called CIG Insurance that we'll talk about in a moment. And we are partners with them. One of our advisors early on is Dr. Steve Quarles, who used to be the chief scientist for wildfire at IBHS. Recently, as I think about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago now, they expanded. So Wildfire Prepared Home is now in 14 different states, including Oklahoma, Texas, and Florida, which I didn't have that on my bingo card, that Florida would be a state that has significant wildfire risk. But as we've seen recently in Nebraska and also in Florida, they're really experiencing some severe wildfire conditions with the droughts that they have. Um, so it's designed, there's two different levels that we'll talk to in a moment, but it's designed to protect the homes primarily from embers, but then also direct flame contact. And so this is what is going to prevent the individual home in our dense urban suburban communities from igniting. And as we adopt this as a community, we'll keep the number of ignitions low enough that hopefully our first responders can get in there and defend those structures and prevent the house-to-house spread from kicking off. So Wildfire Prepared Home has two tiers, and I think this is important because there's been a lot of confusion over the years. I also know insurers have, I would say, been misapplying the standard. Some people, the base level mitigates the embers and direct flame, and it's really the only thing pretty much any of us should be focused on if we have an existing home that we're looking to retrofit. The plus level also adds some additional protection from the radiant heat exposure, but it's really only for new construction. Practically speaking, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to retrofit, and some insurers were telling people they had to do that. Fortunately, I think pretty much all of them has said, they're not requiring that of existing homes anymore. So that's an improvement. The certification is valid for 3 years. There's an annual vegetation review and then a full reinspection on the third anniversary. One nice thing for some of us that might be thinking about selling a home or buying a home soon, the certification is for the property itself, and that allows the buyer of a property to go shop for insurance with the certificate. And that's different than some of the other, state mandated premium discount programs out there. So I'm going to talk through what the base level requires, and then we'll look at some examples. And then we're going to talk about the insurance component here, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So there's the concept of the home ignition zone. Others call it zone zero. I know there's a lot of controversy around this, and the state is trying to promulgate some rules on this, but it's the first 5 feet around the house and includes the structure itself. We're looking for a Class A fire rated roof in good condition. We want something that looks like the right side of the screen, not the left side of the screen. The good news here is that virtually all homes in California have a Class A fire rated roof. And we've had really strong building codes that have been well enforced over the last 30, 40 years that have required this. So that's the first thing that we want to see. A lot of people don't realize this, but asphalt composition shingles can meet the standard. There's not really much additional protection offered by metal or clay tile, although there is some work being done by IBHS to better calibrate and understand the performance of the different roofing materials. The zone zero is probably the hardest thing for many of the customers that we work with. It starts at wherever the furthest extent of the structure is, where it meets the ground, so the siding or the posts or if it's a deck, we have posts there. If it's a balcony, it's the outermost point of the balcony down and then out 5 feet. And it just has to be non-combustible. As we saw in that long exposure, the eddy current within those first 5 feet, anything that's combustible will start to collect those embers, and then that ignites, and then we have a fire right next to our home that makes it really difficult when first responders are trying to triage in the community. I think many of us are familiar with vents on the homes. Until recently, about 2008, homes typically had vents that look like the one on the left in terms of the size, and where Wildfire Prepared requires at least 1/8 inch metal mesh. You can go smaller. There's also nicer products out there from companies like Vulcan or Brand Guard that add some additional protection from flames as well. Siding clearance, we call it. And this is where, as you saw again in that long exposure, the embers accumulate right next to the house at the base of the wall. And if we have wood siding down to, 1 inch or 2 inches off the ground, that can then be ignited by the embers and also the plant debris that's being blown in these wind events up against our homes. So we say we're looking for 6 inches of non-combustible siding clearance, and that can look a couple different ways. Some of us have, concrete foundation walls that give us that 6 inches. In other cases, if we've got, T111 siding or maybe board and batten, kind of that farmhouse look, we can go in and we can retrofit. We can put down basically baseboards of fiber cement, hardy board material, metal flashing. All of those are ways to cost effectively retrofit existing homes. Many of us have decks, and the rules for that is nothing combustible stored on or under them. We have to screen all the areas that have less than 4 feet from the walking surface to the ground so that embers and debris don't get blown underneath and then accumulate with really low clearance and ignite the underside of the deck. Good news is you can have potted plants in non-combustible planters, the ceramic, the terracotta, like you see here in the image. And we want to keep those plants small enough that you can move them when there's a red flag warning. And so the rule is 3 feet by 3 feet, including the planter. And if, we're there's the letter of the law, but then there's also the spirit of it. And we want to keep those things away from the house as much as possible so that if we're away when something were to happen, the plants, if they were to ignite, won't be right next to a window, for example. There's some good news because I know many of us have looked at this in the past, the wildfire prepared requirements, and it's been challenging. It's been tough. The good news is, as of today, but really within the last few months, there's been a new revision and a change to the standard where they're allowing a lot more trees, vegetation beyond the 5 foot line. So previously, trees had to be separated by 10 feet. We no longer have that requirement. Canopies can essentially be touching. Now, the fire agencies would probably still like us to create that canopy separation. So there's still good reasons to do it, but it's not required for wildfire prepared. They also are allowing understory vegetation. So as long as it's less than 2 feet and as long as the trees are limbed up 6 feet off the ground, which pretty much aligns with CAL FIRE and our public resources code requirements for vegetation management. The other good news is we can have more shrubs and plantings. So we can now have, continuous privacy hedges as long as they're more than 10 feet away from the structure. And we can have, groups of shrubs that are either together in a 10-foot plant island, or if you want to space them out, as long as there's two times the height of the tallest shrubs of separation, you can have quite a bit of nice landscaping in our yards. There's a few other requirements. I think they'll be familiar with many of us living in the high risk areas. We want to keep our wood piles away. mowing our grasses. Sheds are a real challenge. That's where, we need to see at least 10 feet away from homes and structures. And they also have to meet the same requirements as the home itself. So if they have vents, that has to be screened. They have to have their own non-combustible zone zero within 5 feet and a good roof as well. Hot tubs are allowed. They just have to be 10 feet from the house with the non-combustible zone. And propane tanks, that's also been relaxed quite a bit recently to align with the Public Resources Code here in California, where, we just want to keep it lean and as non-combustible as possible around the propane tank. So the process of actually getting the designation is becoming easier too. There's two different options. You can go on wildfireprepared.org, create an account. You'll pay $125 if you want to go with the self-service option, and you can study up. There's some online resources, a quiz. You can do the work yourself or find a professional. And then when you're ready, you submit photos and an inspection will be ordered. And if you don't pass, they'll work with you, provide some comments about what would need to be done. But if you are able to pass, you can get the designation. And many people have done this. Since middle of 2024, there's a full service option where we were able to work and partner with the Wildfire Prepared Home Program to offer a full service option everywhere that program's available. So we have a different model where we start folks off and with an initial assessment. We have a self-inspection app that you can use to get started for free, or a professional inspection that will provide you with a plan before you start to spend any money to understand what's required. And we have vetted contractors that know what is required and will do good work. And then at the end, we verify that and we're able to submit it to Wildfire Prepared to get the designation. So I mentioned the self-inspection app. This is available already in the Apple App Store and should be available soon for Android within the next few weeks. And it takes just a few minutes. There's no questions to fill out, no quizzes. We don't ask you what the materials are. You just walk around the home, do a few spins and a couple close-ups. And what that provides you is a beautiful report that shows exactly what you would need to do on your home with photos and links to resources if you wanted to do it yourself. We also have what we call a project design service, so we can help you choose materials, what your product options are, what you want it to look like, landscape design, all of those things to make it look good, because we want this to still maintain your style and have it look good when it comes out the other side. And then I mentioned the vetted pros, where we do vetting of them, make sure that they're going to be above board, that they have the licenses and the insurance, and we're able to work with them to train them on what is required. And then finally, we document the work, and that builds you toward the Wildfire Prepared, get you discounts on the California Fair Plan, and increasingly AAA and CIG are writing or renewing homes that get the designation. And those are two companies that we're able to work with and get people renewal and coverage. So last marketing slide, I promise. We have three different options. I mentioned the starter for free. You can get the basic report with the self-inspection. We have a guided one that provides you with time with a specialist to go over your report and answer questions. And then we have the pro option where we'll send an inspector out to get the data, and then you get that consultation afterward as well. You can visit our website or call the number here on the screen and get started. So I know what everybody's thinking. Nice talk. Yeah. What about insurance? What's the opportunity here so that I don't have to be on the FAIR plan and have to worry about getting non-renewed? And this problem's gotten so bad that even CAL FIRE can't get insurance for some of its fire stations in the higher risk areas. They've had to, really go to lengths to try and find insurance. And talk to any realtor that you know in your network of friends, and they'll tell you that they've seen many, many homes fall out of escrow in our area because of the inability to obtain insurance. And so often sellers are having to credit, multiple years of fair plan premium, or buyers are just walking away, unfortunately. And it's really having an impact. It also translates into our home values. So there was a study that was done in 2023 that showed that homes that just had that were required to disclose the wildfire risk as determined by CAL FIRE sold for $24,000 on average less if than the nearby homes that didn't have to disclose that. And it was actually higher in Southern California than in Northern California. I'm going to do a little bit of math, so bear with me. But we need to think about these things as homeowners, right? It's like we're all doing the what's my return on investment? How is this going to translate? And if you were a hard-nosed real estate, investor, you would value a home based on how much income it could generate through renting minus the expenses. And then what is the required rate of return? Or for many of us as homeowners, essentially I'm owning, but I'm also renting. That home is providing me with housing, and it's an alternative to renting. So my home payment is essentially my mortgage payment, excuse me, is essentially my rent. And then my capitalization rate is the interest rate on my mortgage. So if we look at the valuation here, if I were to pay $3,500, or if I could earn $3,500 from my home, and then I have to deduct, an average or a typical insurance plus maintenance plus property taxes, the net operating income for the year is about $25,000 in the example that we're showing here. We then divide that by the capitalization rate, and my home is $516,000 for the sake of argument. If I were to go on to the fair plan and go with a typical fair plan premium, and my insurance jumped overnight to $4,700, if I held everything else constant, then my home value has gone down by $54,000, almost 10%, just overnight. And that's the impact when insurance goes up drastically has on our property value. So the insurance market, I know many of us are faced with, challenges finding it. And if you talk to the insurance industry, it comes back to some regulations that we put in place as voters in 1988, Proposition 1 created the elected insurance commissioner and also established the process for insurers to submit rate filings for approval, and also consumer advocates that would represent homeowners and insurance payers in front of the commissioner. And what it basically says is insurance rates cannot increase more than 7% a year. And if, over time, unfortunately, we've gotten a little bit away from a normal functioning market. And this chart illustrates that, and there's a link here too that we'll include. But if you were to take a $2,000 policy back in 2010 and project out 7% a year, you would end up in 2023 with a $4,800 premium. That would be the maximum allowed under the Proposition 103. What's happened along the way, and what caused State Farm and Allstate and many others to stop writing policies and to start non-renewing folks, is they weren't getting 7% rate increases approved. And for a while, it was not too big an issue, and we hadn't had too many wildfires and other issues that caused the losses. But over the years, they've had inflated business costs, the cost to rebuild homes to the latest codes, with the materials inflating, that's gone up. So when they replace a home, it costs more. And then we've seen the risk change with climate change and the more severe weather. But what really caused the market to go into a tailspin was during the COVID time, we had this massive borrowing and stimulus that increased inflation. And so when the insurers went to go buy reinsurance from, these global financial firms, they increased the rates because of inflation. And we ended up in this situation where actuarially the the insurers should have been charging $7,700, but the maximum they could charge is $4,800. And so that created this situation where we saw such a pullback in availability. The good news is that we're starting to see some of the reforms put in place that are easing the crisis. And State Farm recently did a settlement where they got about a 17% rate increase, which is about half of what they requested. Um, there's some, wishy-washy commitments to start writing again, but we'll see how that plays out. Farmers insurance has continued to write policies, but they tend to, require that the homes be, built within the last 30 years, and they have some pretty strict requirements. AAA is still and has continued to write during this whole time. They're very, focused on their members. They're not publicly traded, and they're able to really invest in their policyholders. I know they're now offering a 12.5% premium discount as well as a renewal offer for folks who get the Wildfire Prepared Home discount, where they'll commit to renewing regardless of a home's wildfire risk. And they've do have been, excuse me, requiring that some policyholders get the Wildfire Prepared Home designation as a condition of renewing. And, folks are getting about 75 days notice on that. Allstate is still not writing, and from what we can tell, they're sending around inspectors, and they seem to have a kind of a custom standard, which I don't personally agree with professionally, but they're requiring all the most expensive mitigation measures, unfortunately. And then Mercury has gotten a lot of attention. They're being very aggressive about writing new business here in California with mitigation and also factoring in structure separation. And they're now offering discounts of up to 40% depending on the home and its condition. Capital Insurance Group, CIG, is another one that very recently started writing homes with the Wildfire Prepared Home designation. And they also do not just homeowners, but ag and commercial properties. So any of us who, have more than 5 acres can qualify for ag, an agriculture property, and then any homes or businesses with a legal entity like an LLC can also get potentially a policy through them. Coming to an end here, and I know there's been some questions, so we'll get to those in a moment. Pacific Specialty is writing new policies. USAA just got their rate filing approved and kind of sets the stage for them to begin writing again. And they're a great organization. They're really dedicated again to their members and supporting them. Fair Plan just filed for a 36% rate increase. And unfortunately, after the LA fire losses, pretty much all of us, anybody with an insurance policy is now paying because their rates didn't cover their losses. So, it's falling on every single one of us. They recently updated in November the premium discount. So they actually reduced it by significantly. It's still, 16.4%. But the primary reduction was for the Firewise USA community discount that got lowered from 10% down to 1.5%. And this is an example of, AAAs, but all the insurers, the admitted insurers in California are required to offer premium discounts. AAA is doing 5% for Firewise USA. And if you look at what Wildfire Prepared Home would give you, it's about base level would give you 4.5%. And then you would get 8% if you got to the plus level designation. All right. So thank you for the time and the interest and for all the great questions that we're going to get to in a moment, and really love being part of the community here in Sonoma County and supporting Fire Safe Sonoma and all the work that our community leaders are doing here. So that was what I was hoping to cover, and maybe we have some time for questions.
Absolutely. So some great questions came in, Ivan. So I'll go through them kind of here in order. First one was, could you tell us about the suitability of fiber cement boards for gates or fencing maybe with metal framing. Is Hardy approved by IBHS for fencing for wildfire prepared home certification?
So great question. And the short answer is yes. So fiber cement as a material is non-combustible. And so it would meet the requirements for any fencing within 5 feet. You have the option, I would consider or encourage folks to go a bit beyond 5 feet. Fences are typically 6 feet high. If they were to ignite, that's 12-foot flame on top of it. It still, could expose our home, in depending on where the wind is, right? So we probably want to go a little further out if you can, but 5 feet's the minimum. The challenge with fiber cement is that it's it's a cementitious material, and if it is exposed to water, it tends to swell up and it will start to degrade. You can break off chunks of it, and it's gonna not look good over time. So we got to think about how it's exposed and how the fence is assembled. In order to manage the water. And that can, there's some clever people out there. If you took a section of hardy board and cut it to the dimensions, and then you trim the edge or clad the edges with like metal flashing. That's something that we've seen people do. One other thing to consider is it's quite a heavy material, and so you're either going to need to beef up the support posts and the hinges, or look at some other options there. I will say I would recommend there's more and more fencing, metal fencing products coming out, and the cost is dropping quite a bit. So there's some really attractive, Durabond being one of them, and a few other products coming on the market. The fencing industry is seeing this, and they are responding. So they're lighter weight. They can withstand the elements better, and the affordability piece is being addressed.
Great. Next, I guess before we get to the next question, there was a chat put in that it sounds like AAA is not writing policies out in Cazadero, so maybe a hot off the press deal, but from the crowd, it looks like not an option in Cazadero right now.
Yeah.
Next question, could you talk a little bit about shade arbors attached to homes? I know that's been a big conversation as of late.
Yes. So if we're talking about, like, some people call them pergolas, it's shade structures, typically four posts and some beams, and then there's some kind of roof. Sometimes it's wood slats. And then so the rules with that, if it's physically attached to the home and integrated into the home's support structure, then the roof has to be a Class A material, like the rest of the house. So, asphalt, composition, metal, whatever. And if it's wood slats, there has to be at least a foot in between each slat. Um, then the base of the posts have to be strengthened, just like the siding of the home. So, where within 6 inches of the ground, we need to clad the base of the posts with metal flashing, fiber cement. Some people do some really nice, like, masonry stone treatments as another way of doing it. We can't have any vegetation growing on the structure, and the shade structure essentially extends the footprint of the home. So that 5 foot non-combustible zone then applies both underneath the structure, the shade piece, as well as within 5 feet around it. So that's how we can mitigate a shade structure. If it's freestanding, then it has to be at least 10 feet from the house, and then meet all the other requirements that I just mentioned. If the shade structure is completely non-combustible, and there's a lot of beautiful, like, metal options that frankly look almost identical to wood. There's a company called Aluma Wood that manufactures these, and if you can place that anywhere, as long as there's nothing combustible within 5 feet of the house, the shade structure itself can be right next to the home.
Great. There was another question about the best materials for decks when we're trying to address that combustion component.
Decks are a tough one. Uh, my personal opinion, and I love decks, and for many of us, especially if we're building on a slope, like the deck becomes the yard or where we spend a lot of time. So um, I'm I'm not here to, say that they're bad. If you have the option, and I'm mostly talking about decks that are fairly low to the ground. I see decks all the time that are like 1 foot off the ground and it's a flat area. Really consider replacing that with pavers or a hardscape patio if you're open to it. I know, you might have to step down 1 or 2 steps to get there, but the deck is a very vulnerable part of the structure, and it's really hard to defend and mitigate. And it increases the area of vegetation around us that we then have to treat. You have to it increases the surface area of the landscaping that then falls within 5 feet or even 30 feet that has to be mitigated. So, um, if consider replacing it, especially if it's at the end of its life, needs to be redone anyway. Um, that would be my number one recommendation. For I think the question was specifically the materials. Is that right, Ben?
Yep.
So the structure of the deck, big dimensional lumber, is a little more resistant to ignition. So the vulnerability for a deck is debris falling between the deck boards on top of the joists. So the joists are the structure, and then the deck boards sit on top, and the debris lands right there, and then the embers ignite, and then that starts this little creeping fire like a fuse back toward the home in between the deck boards. And the way to, prevent that is to use a more dense material for the walking surface. So if we're going to keep our decks, we want to think about using like Trex, Azek, the hardwoods. Ipe is a popular one. Those are all much denser than redwood or pine and can resist that ember ignition a bit longer. So that's one option. You can also do like panels like plywood with lightweight concrete or tile on top of that. And there's some other products that give us like a continuous non-combustible surface. So that's another option especially for an elevated deck, if we're looking for ways to prevent that.
Great. Another question, and yeah, I'll send it to you. Was best practice is to have the question was, I believe the best practice is to have plastic trash cans and recycle cans stored outside of zone 0. Is that true? Oftentimes, storage of these bins is only available against structures.
So it is true. I think, you know, what I would suggest is focus on the red flag warning days, and anytime we're going to be on, an extended absence, like a vacation. That's when, put the trash cans inside the garage. And that holds true for a lot of things, actually, like the 5-gallon propane tanks for our grills. Like on the red flag warning day, if we're away for vacation, put that stuff in the garage. It's going to be safer in the garage than it is, within 5 feet. Or you can move it beyond 5 feet when it's the risks are actually there. So day to day, practically, I don't think anybody realistically expects that we're going to, store them in inconvenient locations. But be mindful and do the right thing. Pay attention to the red flag warnings, and if you're away on vacation.
Perfect. Looks like we got maybe time for one more question from David. He asks, is the 10-foot hot tub spa distance requirement new? Could you describe the science thinking behind that requirement?
Yeah, it is new. It was introduced about a year ago after the LA fires, and they really saw these hot tubs, even if they're, the kind of the composite plastic materials, um, they multiple times were seen as the, fire pathway, bringing the fire to the home. And even though they have water inside, I think it's kind of counterintuitive for us. But It's the foam topper, insulating cover, as well as the siding. And sometimes that's, cedar wood or regular wood or plastic. All of those are vulnerable to ember and debris accumulation or to radiant heat exposure. Those things get going and then they spread it right to the house. And so that was introduced. If the hot tub, is made out of concrete or ceramics, tile on the outside, that is a different conversation. Those are allowed, and there are some non-combustible covers that you can uh, purchase as well.
Great. I think we'll go with one last one
Oh,
because I know this is
I
a.
will say, I forgot to mention, sorry, Chief. You can have hot tubs on decks, but they have to be 10 feet from the house, and the material underneath the hot tub has to be non-combustible. And for 2 feet underneath the hot tub and 2 feet around it. So there are ways to do that, but it's probably a very challenging retrofit there.
I think one great question to leave the group with as we close out today. So many people get hung up on what to do first and what can they do to make a change, maybe on a lower cost investment idea. So, the question for you would be, what is the first step for home hardening?
I think the first step for home hardening, the biggest impact, lowest cost, and for many of us, this is something we can do ourselves this weekend, is the non-combustible 5 feet around and our homes. And so, we can rake out the wood mulch as the first step. And then we can think about, what we might like there next. And the plants that I know many of us really value. The You can have plants in non-combustible planters if they're small, like we talked about, 3 feet by 3 feet. Um, and you can have up to 10 of them within the 5 foot zone. And so that's a way to still have some of the look and the feel and the aesthetics that we like. Or we can move the plants that are in the ground now, just beyond the 5 feet. And from, the driveway, if you're driving by on the street, it pretty much looks the same. And, but now we have this nice walkway next to the home that's going to be fire safe. So that would be, the most impactful thing to do and to start with. The second most impactful thing would be our vents, particularly the ones down at the base, like the foundation crawl space area. You can get, really affordable products out there. Wildfire Defense mesh is one, and we can get you a discount if you want. And it's another project that is fairly approachable for many homeowners to do themselves.
Great. Thank you very much, Ivan. Great information today. Really informative. I really appreciate your time helping us out. For those of you for just closing out today's event, we have some community updates. Please don't forget to check out our Fire Safe Sonoma calendar on our website for any upcoming events that we have coming up, and to stay in the loop and subscribe for our updates. Please feel free to share any events that you may have promoting with us, and we'll get them out on our events calendar. And let us know what you would like us to present in the coming speaker series videos that we produce, because we want to make sure that we're giving you the information you're looking for to help guide the wildfire resiliency in your neighborhood and your home. Some upcoming events. Last month, we had Julia Berkey from All Hands Ecology that presented on fostering prescribed fire resilient communities. So if you missed that, you can find that recording on our YouTube channel. Next month, we'll be joined by our fellows and their presentation on the environmental impacts of fires in the WUI. So mark your calendars, same time, same place for our normal fire speaker series events. And if you're in the area tomorrow, stop by the Climate Ready Katati Fair to meet the fellows out in the field, spreading that information for wildfire resiliency. Ivan, again, thank you very much for coming out today. We look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks, everyone.